direct human interaction that AI will never be able to replace. AI will come close for sure, right? It will maybe even look like a human, but that kind of experience that helps you, especially if you're a first-time founder and you don't come from a background where you've been surrounded by entrepreneurs, or where that is something that from your family has been something on your mind all along. You need those examples, those good practices. You need those people around you that influence you to show you it is possible, to show you that that is a road you can take.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're situated. We have a special guest from Germany, Nik Riesmeier, the Director of Education from Founders Foundation. Good morning, Nik.
Good morning, Marco.
All right, so today we're going to talk about teaching entrepreneurship and also Founders Foundation as a no-profit, an entity very focused on the entrepreneurship ecosystem and supporting regional entrepreneurial ecosystem. So maybe we should start from that. So the definition of the activities of the foundation, and you guys are representing, I'm sure I'm gonna mispronounce it, but Germany's Mittelstand as a region, right? So maybe we can, for people that are not really familiar with the geography of Germany, maybe help us understand.
Sure. We'll start with the geography, right? I mean, German Mittelstand is basically translated to hidden champions, which are, of course, all over Germany. But we at the Founders Foundation, we're located in a smaller town called Bielefeld. There's still 350,000 inhabitants, but the area that surrounds us, Ostwestfalia-Lippe, is traditionally one of the powerhouses economically in Germany. So the area around us isn't very well known internationally compared to, say, Berlin or Munich or other places. But in terms of economic output and economic importance for Germany, for Germany's economy as a whole, it is one of the most dominant regions in Germany, with a lot of the hidden champions, a lot of the B2B focused, unique companies that we have in Germany that produce one product, are world leading in their fields, and no one has ever heard of them because they're usually quite hidden, as the name says. Maybe some of you have heard of Dr. Oetker or Miele, which are the two most prominent and well-known companies from the area, but there are so many more that there is a lot of hidden champions around in the area.
Yeah, so you would say is manufacturing the core of the industrial ecosystem?
Indeed. The industrial ecosystem here is very much focused on production and manufacturing, electricity engineering. If you go deeper down into certain fields, so any one of you charging an electronic car, an e-car, you probably have components made in Ostwestfalia-Lippe, in the region here, somewhere built in your e-charger. So your charging stations, your Tesla supercharger probably has something built in from the region.
Got it. If you look at a map, I mean, again, sorry for if I'm missing some of the geography references here, but this is a region where probably the two largest cities in between are Hannover and Dortmund. Is that right?
Yes, you can pretty much draw a circle between, and that's where the region is.
Okay, excellent. All right, so tell us a little bit more about the genesis of the foundation. I think was created around 10 years ago today. Why and how?
Indeed. Yeah, we actually had our birthday celebration this morning. So we turned 10 years.
Oh, wow. Well, look at that.
Yesterday. So I'm pretty proud of that moment. When we started out in this area, so Founders Foundation, we're a non-profit, and we started out on a journey seeing that the region around us had a very strong entrepreneurial output about 150 years ago. A lot of the companies that are existing here are family-led companies in the third, fourth, or fifth generation. And there used to be a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in this area. However, when we looked in the region 10 years ago, we saw that the startup output in general was relatively low. So there was maybe 10, 20 startups in total. There aren't really actual numbers, but there was a very, very low base coming from an industrial powerhouse like the region is. So we saw the need to start and get started in producing more startups for the area and focusing on entrepreneurial education to enable the next generation of founders and the next generation of those Mittelstand companies and family-led companies in the area to actually get going and start with innovative ideas right here in the industrial heartland of Germany.
And how did it get started? I mean, you mentioned that it's a not-for-profit. How is the sustainability of the foundation? Is that membership base? Is that support with the region? How do you sustain the infrastructure?
Indeed. So we're fully funded by the Bertelsmann Corporation, Bertelsmann Media Publishing, probably a well-known company. They're located in Gütersloh, which is also not too far away from where the Office of Founders Foundation is located. And the Bertelsmann media company has a Bertelsmann Foundation, right? And the foundation in and of itself also has an educational focus. And one of the family members of Bertelsmann already 50, 60 years ago mentioned that the biggest risk for an entrepreneur is not taking any risks. And he was very much focused on also educating the next generation in the family as well as above and beyond of that. So following in that footstep and following in the same spirit, the Bertelsmann Foundation enabled us to fund Founders Foundation and to get going with our mission of educating the next generation of entrepreneurs in the area.
And I think then the effects to the local region really started showing up. So also one of the reasons why we're having this conversation is because you guys have been among the organizations that got awarded in the latest Startup Ecosystem Stars event back in December of 2025, at really the DS to recognize entities that are having a significant impact in their territory when it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation. So I think you're very proud of what you guys have built, and today entrepreneurship education, I mean, it's something that obviously is not new. You claim your approach is very different, it's very distinct from the traditional venture client or scouting. So help us understand how you do things.
Yeah. So we have a two-folded approach. On the one side, we do the traditional entrepreneurship education, and that indeed is not very new or significantly different from other places. And on the other side, what we did build up is the Hinterland brand and the Hinterland Alliance, also the Hinterland of Things conference in Germany. This year, going into the 8th conference in total. And the approach is basically to connect all of those hidden champions and the German Mittelstand with the next generation of founders. Because what we saw is basically we can't compete in Bielefeld and the surrounding area with like an ecosystem, say like Berlin, all right, where you already have thousands of startups, or if you go to Munich, where you have a talent pool of great talent output from universities that do cutting edge research. We do have some universities here, we do have some startups here, and so on, but it's not our strength to compete on the same level and in the same field. But what we did see was that we have a unique advantage most other ecosystems do not, and that is the closeness to all of these companies, the family-led companies here in the area that do cutting edge innovation in their small little fields, but also need help basically to remain world-leading companies, to remain sustainable and innovative. And they need that support in collaboration with startups. Now, what separates this approach from, say, a typical kind of venture clienting or venture scouting approach, for us is we put the educational approach first. So we do not really go into the companies and ask, what kind of startup are you looking for? Rather, we enable those companies to educate themselves on how to become more innovative and also integrate them into our educational approach. So when you see the startup lifecycle, we do not wait until the product is done, until we connect to the companies. We do that connect very early on at a stage where you can't really make a profit from it. But the exchange between the traditional companies, between the employees and the families in those companies that own them, as well as the next generation of founders on the side that we bring in, that exchange to foster it in that immediate moment before the idea starts, before a startup starts getting validation from the market, before you actually make the product. That is a unique advantage that helps to develop products very close to what the market actually needs and very close to a customer segment within Germany that is A, very large, but B, is also very much underserved if you start out in ecosystems like Berlin and Munich, where you might focus on larger corporations, publicly traded companies that have a very different approach of buying or selling things, but also have a very different approach on how they look for startups, how they client, how they scout. So there is a very unique thing that is unique for Germany in general, because we have a lot of those family-led companies. But I would also say unique for Europe and a blueprint for Europe, because it's not just in Germany that you have a lot of those companies. If you look to France, if you look to Italy, we are a company and a region that is dominant in economic terms, led by companies where you have families, 5th, 6th, 7th generation, or some younger families, but mostly family-led companies. A uniqueness to Europe that needs innovation to stay relevant.
Very true. So, I mean, the backbone of most of the economy in Europe is actually based on on family business, on entities that have been around for generations with their innovative moments, but also with their issues of scalability, and in particular when the market becomes more and more competitive with international players that are coming in from different angles. That also the generational change becomes one of the typical issues to address, as well as maintaining a spirit of innovation from the core. So if I understand correctly, so you tend to focus in two things. One is the medium companies, not the large corporates, in a typical support of their innovation challenges and scouting for products that can fit well. And also you try to do it very early on, and so that helped also on the side of the startup to build a product around a real customer need, right? So
Indeed.
That has on one side the added value of creating an innovation sparks among the SME, the medium companies there, but on the other side also helps the early entrepreneurs in defining the typical lean startup methodology, what makes sense to be built before they go the wrong route and they invest a lot of money and time into a development that is called waterfall development. Tell me, how do you do this matching, and how large is the population that you're serving? So how do you define the boundaries of that population?
Yeah. So if we define the boundaries, we have around 2 to 2.5 million inhabitants in the region of Ostwestfalia-Lippe. However, that doesn't stop us from supporting founders or companies outside of this region. So if there is a company, family-led Mittelstand, right, that is not located very definedly in that region, but is still interested in working with us, we will be open to that. Same goes for founders. If they say, hey, I'm not from the region, say I'm from Munich or Berlin or wherever, but I'm very interested in getting that very close touch points to those companies, then we're more than happy to help them. Because at the end of the day, right, if I bring a founder from outside to the region and help those companies here to remain relevant and stay innovative, I'm still following up on that educational approach. So from that perspective, the region is where we're based and where we're focused on, but it's not exclusively a limitation on whom we would be supporting or helping.
The other question is, how do you manage the matching between those entities?
Indeed, yeah, we have different formats, and depending on the stage in the startup lifecycle that we're looking at, we do it through various different ways. So coming up soon in March, we start a very early ideation program. We have 2 batches per year. Literally 40, 50 talents coming in, not yet sure whether they want to start a startup, what kind of idea they do have. And what we do is we do match them already at that stage with ideas coming out of these companies. Those are not necessarily very much refined ideas. Those are things to look at, market opportunities, certain technologies that might be interesting to look at if they can be applied to challenges that arise within these companies. So we give them ideas and opportunities to go into, to kind of follow down that rabbit hole if an ideation, if a validation, and the next step actually makes sense. And that validation stage is also one where we do start matching up, right? Because we do support in finding those companies. We get them into the office, so you find the validation partners right here when you have the idea, and you get that real life feedback straight away. So even if you don't find the idea, right, you find maybe something else, but also the old style traditional companies have a direct way of approaching and getting an exchange with the founders and with the ideas that they have. And then when we go down further into the line, we have an incubator program and an accelerator program. And depending on the stage, we start to make sure that pilot stages, pilot projects remain relevant within the incubator program. Once validation is done, when they start getting the product set up, quite often we do see that from the validation partners already one will be, hey, if you start developing it, if you have your MVP, come back to me. We'll see if it works. And from there on, the later stage that we match is within the accelerator, where we have a very unique concept, corporate sounding board. The name is probably used in a lot of other places as well. But what we try to maintain there is really that direct touch, not necessarily startup to company, but it's literally the head of innovation, chief digital officer, the C-level of those companies in direct relationship, more of a mentor and coaching base with the future founders, with those that are in the accelerator program, where it's not necessarily about finding your next customer, but it's about finding those people that can help you to define how to run your startup, how to develop your product, help you to open up doors to other networks and ecosystems that you need, all on a basis where you meet eye level, right, one-on-one meetings, and you don't really sell, you just give feedback, you listen, and you value each other for the information that you gain in both directions. Because education isn't just entrepreneurship education in one direction, where you teach young people or young at heart people on how to start a startup. Entrepreneurship education also goes in the direction that you have to maintain that innovative spirit and the educational hunger, I would even say, within old style industries and economies to stay relevant and to stay innovative and to continuously adapt and to change and to see what's out there and what is possible.
And maybe in 10 years, it would be interesting to learn about some examples, right? So this is a multi-stage process that you mentioned. Give us some examples, some successful stories of, obviously there's an intangible, harder to measure effect in the territory, right? Is really the disengagement and at core of being focused more on innovation on both sides of the aisle. So both on the traditional companies and obviously reinforcing the reason for starting new ideas and new startups. But also there must be some tangible results. So maybe share some examples of success stories, and then we can talk about measurability, but maybe examples would help.
Yeah, of course. So if I look at the meta level, right, from, as I said in the beginning, like maybe 10 or 20 startups in the region, we're now looking at around 380 in total in 10 years, which is quite a success story for a region that was a startup desert. And if we look at all of Germany, what we're very proud of, the German Startup Association, they do a response every year looking into various different ecosystems, how well those startups cooperate with corporations and with the Mittelstand. And our region is leading at that. So 60 to 70% of the startups here have direct relations still on a B2B context, working together with those industries, with those companies, right? So those numbers give us a bit of a proof that we're going into the right direction. And then if we go drill down into certain stories, so one startup from a very early batch, in I think 2018 or 2019, Value Desk, right? They created something here that is very unique story-wise for how we approach things. So one of the founders, he left his company after 20 years of work experience, had an idea in mind. He had a problem that wasn't solved. He saw it, had an idea in mind. We matched him within the programs with two techies. Together, they started out a startup that is still successful, still running. They're located 500 meters away from me right now. Don't really know. I would have to look up how many employees they do have at the moment, but they're quite successful and they enable companies in this region, but also, of course, outside of the region, to drill down in their own data and use industrial data that they do have to become more profitable, which is the best approach really to stay relevant economically, because we do have a lot of challenges in Europe. I think that's clear for most people in Europe and beyond. And if we really want to take that step to stay relevant in the future and remain an economic powerhouse in so many various different levels, then we need exactly this kind of cooperation and collaboration between new ideas, startups, and the old economy. Because we can't just renew everything. We can't put a way forward where we say, forget everything that was done before, and let's start out all tech or all kind of Silicon Valley vibes. We need to look into the strength that we do have, that is production, that is manufacturing, that is what we traditionally excel at in Europe. And we have to make sure that the startups and the innovation that we produce and the deep tech that we do have in Europe, which is our unique advantage, make sure that we stay relevant in exactly those fields.
This is very true. This is one of the recurring topic that we have here in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, when companies, regions, entities come to visit, all with the same intention, that somewhat to replicate the throughput, the success stories that that put Silicon Valley on a map for the last 100 years. But the key elements here is not to replicate, with the same footprint, because it would be impossible. It would be a recipe for disaster. But rather, go back to the drawing board, understand what is unique about my own ecosystem, and how can I implement strategies where, similar to what a startup has to do, I find some unique areas of development. What are my strengths, and where should I be different? Because today, the market of innovation is more and more connected, is more international, is a tournament that is open for everybody, and more understanding first what is unique about our history and unique moments of development is the only way then eventually to stay relevant. Otherwise, everybody's trying to focus on the same models, the digital apps and whatnot, and become impossible then eventually to compete with the ecosystem that have scales of difference of funding, for example, or exactly, density of entrepreneurs, etc. Let's talk a little bit, zooming out, about Germany in general, right? Germany has always been at the core of the industrial tissue of Europe. In the last few years, obviously, with a lot of challenges ahead. Berlin has been on the map for a long time, in particular for aggregating a lot of early stage startups. Although it's hard to point a lot of success stories that were able then to scale and really become global success stories. So what do you think is Germany's issue, and what do you think it could be a solution if there is one? Right? I mean, obviously that's a complex question that entails a lot of different variables. But from your point of view of somebody that is focused on teaching entrepreneurship, what do you think that is that where Germany stands today, and how do you think that it can improve their position?
Yeah. Well, I think to begin with, we have the same opportunities and potential as other ecosystems. Like talent density is not different here than it is in, let's say, the Silicon Valley. Of course, it conglomerates right in the valley, right? You have more talent. Just simply, if you go to one coffee spot, there will be more talent sitting there than you might have in Germany in 10 coffee spots. But all in all, if you boil it down, you have the same kind of starting positions to get ahead with. I see two things in Germany that are standing in the way, I wouldn't say, but that are the issues, really. One thing is psychologically, and that is the mindset. Culturally, we are not very well suited to a lean methodology, to put it mildly. Germans traditionally, and they're just generalizing, right? It's not everyone, but generalizing, are very much focused on security. And that is especially true for companies that are already existent, or for people that are coming out of these companies, right? Instead of taking a risk, take the safe way, take the safe bet. You can see it at products that Germany excelled at building. We're very, very good at making products that are absolutely perfect. Right.
Which is the opposite of lean startup methodology, right?
Exactly.
So when it says security, is not social. I mean, it's not a cybersecurity, but is a mental, being stable and having something predictable, right? So which is the opposite of entrepreneurship. So that's a mindset, I guess.
Totally. And you can see it's, it's generalizing, stereotypizing, sure. But if you look at the German car industry, right, great cars, but terrible software. And I think that really shows the approach of why Germany has fallen behind in the past 10 or 15 years. However, we still have all the potential in terms of talent, knowledge, density, capital markets, and so on. It's still all here. We just have to take that opportunity and start changing the approach on how we look at things. This is why entrepreneurship education is, in our view, so important, not just for startup founders, but for everyone. In other terms, and this is second point, I think, that's standing in the way, especially later stages, it becomes difficult for startups in Germany to scale or to find funding. So once you've come to, say, Series A, Series B, and once you start to internationalize, not just in Europe, but above, you do lack funding, you do lack a bit of credibility, and it usually doesn't really help to produce those kind of global powerhouses that Berlin, for example, as an ecosystem, and giving the time it already had, otherwise would have. It doesn't have a very vibrant fintech scene. If you look at German startups like N26, Trade Republic, and so on, but they were only ever able to capture the European market. And I think that's also a problem a lot of European startups actually do face, which I'm not quite sure if it's a mindset game, but also if you're in Europe and you capture the European market, that is technically 27 different markets. So you're already quite busy simply capturing those smaller markets, which altogether and combined, right, are the same size as the American market.
Bigger. Like, I mean, from bigger, population point of view, bigger, right? You're looking at 100 million people more. So, with all the complexity of segmentation, a cultural perspective, not to let alone languages, but obviously there is the whole movement of try to simplify from Europe the context of one single framework, a legal framework, also to create an entity that can actually be by nature European first. But this is still a work in progress from the policymakers. I think this is taking obviously longer than what initially expected. So the key here is to try to switch and to change the mindset. And then once things get started, we all know that then Germans would be the best to build something that lasts, right? But how to get started multiple times. Follow-up questions here are, well, number one, on the how easy, so the whole concept of nature versus nurture debate, right? Of what can be taught versus what is actually natural. And the second one is the value, how do you teach the value of failure in general? And I know that you to some extent you incorporate this in your curriculum as well, which goes against the century of stability of the idea that I need to is something sustainable that I can do every day without having to face failure and starting again. So how do you approach these two topics within Founders Foundation?
Yes, I think the most important thing, learning how to fail or learning to accept failure. I think that is the rather point. That's nurture all by itself. I see a lot of founders in Germany who had international experience, who are by default not the stereotypical safety-looking German, and are very well capable of learning with failure and being open to failure, right? Because any type of security, any type of not seeking out risk, like it's the same kind of metal. It's two sides of a coin, right? Anyone who is looking for security, there needs to be someone else who was looking for risk, because only if you take risks will you be able to create something that then will be secure. I think that is something that is quite often forgotten, especially if you're working in an existing company and you're looking for security. Someone took a risk to start that company. They might have taken it 100 years ago. They might have taken it 50 years ago, but they took that risk. So it's always been there. It's just been a bit in a sleeping stage, I would say, in Germany, simply because success is also something, and success in a secure success is something that gives you an opportunity to no longer seek risks. And that was different in the past, right? That's one of the points. You can teach it, but it's also a psychological thing that everyone needs to accept a little bit for themselves. It's putting, especially in our programs, we try to do that. It's putting up front that, yes, 9 out of 10 startups fail. Most of the founders, most of the people that come into our programs will not start a successful startup, or will start a startup, but after a couple of years will then realize that it's not going to be successful all the way through. But the things that you learn, the failures along the way, those are the ones that supercharge your career afterwards. So no matter what you do, especially if you're younger, right? If you're just coming straight out of university, yes, statistically, starting your own startup, everything is against you, especially if you don't have work experience from a prior role you had at any stage. But the learnings along the way about yourself, about business, and especially about how you act and interact with failure, whether it's on a personal level or in your startup, that will stay with you for the rest of your life. That is a mindset more than anything else. And that's, you can't really put it into numbers. I mean, you can try, right? Over the course of a lifetime, how much more did you earn because of participating in certain programs, because of a mindset that you got? But at the same time, it's always a bit of a fuzzy number if you boil it down to an individual level. But anyone who's taken that road can guarantee you that the winnings you got from failure and from taking that risk totally overweight any type of security that you give up.
And that's very true. And then, the world of entrepreneurship is, I think, is built over those concepts. And sometimes we just forget. I mean, the examples that I often give is the Steve Jobs of the later phase was definitely a product of a Steve Jobs being fired from the company that he founded in the first place, right? And then a failure between the two phases is very hard to think of a similar outcome. And so that's definitely true of independently from the ecosystem where you're operating. Obviously, there are ecosystems that treat the phases of a failure as one of the steps, right? That is inevitable. And so also from a practical point of view, they make it simple to fail and move on. So you don't have to get stuck in the long tail that sometimes bureaucracy put in between. That's something definitely in particular Europe has to learn. But then the mental process is the same, regardless of where you're originated. All right, and Nik, I want to talk about as the last thought about the future in general. Kind of in a question with a that is bifold. So, on one side, I mean, it's clear to everybody that to some extent, teaching entrepreneurship, as pretty much teaching anything, right, is now a commodity, right? So you have so much content everywhere. Even more so, looking ahead, 2-3 years from now, we'll have, including now, our personal assistant that it knows better than anybody else what to do next, and being the closest friends that we ever had, in particular on professional suggestions. So how do you see this for an entity like yours? And maybe related to that, what is the most unteachable lesson that you have learned in your role that you wish you could put into a module? So how do you see the kind of future of entrepreneurship, education in general, and are there certain things that are somewhat unteachable?
Yeah. Well, I think it boils down to one thing that is unteachable, but that's also the future, because you can only do it with human connection, and that is a direct touch between former founders and future founders. That kind of direct human interaction that AI will never be able to replace. AI will come close for sure, right? It will maybe even look like a human, but that kind of experience that helps you, especially if you're a first-time founder and you don't come from a background where you've been surrounded by entrepreneurs, or where that is something that from your family has been something on your mind all along. You need those examples, those good practices. You need those people around you that influence you to show you it is possible, to show you that that is a road you can take, to show you that Yes, risk sometimes means that you lose security, right? But there is a payoff in the end, and that you find places like Founders Foundation, other ecosystem builders, right? That you find a network in an ecosystem that even if you do fail, you're not going to fall deep, right? Or the fall is not going to be as hard as it might be. In terms of knowledge, like the stuff that most accelerator programs, entrepreneurship, education program providers, and so on teach, you can find that anywhere. It is free of charge. You can go on YouTube, you can go Google or whatever. You will find it anywhere. You can do ChatGPT, a little interview with yourself. It's all there, but I question whether most people will be able to comprehend the information that they're getting and will be able to know what to do with it. And for that, you still need that human touch. You need the direct connection. You need the direct connection to customers, to talk to them, to not just get in data point information, but to get that human information. Is the other person willing to work with this? Is the other person open to try something out? Of course, if we imagine a world in 10 years where AI from one company will interact with AI from another company, and they will kind of agree on what to do next, you no longer need that human in the loop. But I don't see that world yet in 10 years. I see a world where we will use AI for a lot of procedures and processes. But at the end of the day, the decisions that are taken, whether we're going to try something out, go a new road down the road, right? That is still a human decision. And for all of that, you need something that you can't get from AI. You need that direct interaction with someone else surrounding you.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And I think the only options that we have here is to double down, triple down on our human unique ability to connect. And I think we should be more explicit about this, because otherwise, obviously, everybody's job will get replaced. So first, to understand what are those traits that would make us uniquely, human, and how to translate that into, in this case, business practices that will be impossible to automate. So with that, I wish you a great future there, and thanks for what you're doing on behalf of your local community. Looking forward to hearing more success stories from your region. Thank you, Nik.
Thank you, Marco.